lying about, limp as leeches, motionless as the dead. "They'll kill themselves before morning at this rate," shouted Murray to me. "They're drinking it by the quart. Here's another barrel. Come on!" We rallied our small forces, and after a brief but furious struggle succeeded in capsizing it. It poured away in a flood over the stones, over the prostrate figures that sprawled on them, and a howl of reproach followed. "If you pour away any more of that, Major," said an unctuous voice in my ear, "you'll intoxicate the stones, and they'll be getting up and knocking us down." I had been aware of a fat shoulder next to mine in the throng as we heaved the puncheon over, and I now recognized the ponderous wit and Falstaffian figure of Mr. James Canty, a noted member of the Skiborn Board of Guardians, and the owner of a large farm near at hand. "I never saw worse work on this strand," he went on. "I consider these debaucheries a disgrace to the country." Mr. Canty was famous as an orator, and I presume it was from long practice among his fellow P.L.G.'s that he was able, without apparent exertion, to outshout the storm. At this juncture the long-awaited reinforcements arrived, and along with them came Dr. Jerome Hickey, armed with a black bag. Having mentioned that the bag contained a pump, not one of the common or garden variety, and that no pump on board a foundering ship had more arduous labours to perform, I prefer to pass to other themes. The wreck, which had at first appeared to be as inexhaustible and as variously stocked as that in the Swiss Family Robinson, was beginning to fail in its supply. The crowd were by this time for the most part incapable from drink, and the fresh contingent of police tackled their work with some prospect of success by the light of a tar barrel, contributed by the owner of the public house. At about the same time I began to be aware that I was aching with fatigue, that my clothes hung heavy and soaked upon me, that my face was stiff with the salt spray and the bitter wind, and that it was 2 hours past dinner time. The possibility of fried salt herrings and hot whisky and water at the public house rose dazzlingly before my mind when Mr. Canty again crossed my path. "In my opinion, ye have the whole cargo under control now, Major," he said, "and the police and the sailors should be able to account for it all now by the help of the light. Wasn't I the finished fool that I didn't think to send up to my house for a tar barrel before now? Well, we're all foolish sometimes. But indeed it's time for us to give over, and that's what I'm after saying to the Captain and Mr. Murray. You're exhausted now, the three of you, and if I might make so bold, I'd suggest that you come up to my little place and have what'd warm you up before you'd go home. It's only a few perches up the road." The tide had turned, the rain had begun again, and the tar barrel illumined the fact that Dr. Hickey's dreadful duties alone were pressing. We held a council, and finally followed Mr. Canty, picking our way through wreckage of all kinds, including the human variety. Near the public house I stumbled over something that was soft and had a squeak in it. It was the piper, with his head and shoulders in an overturned rum barrel, and the bagpipes still under his arm. I knew the outward appearance of Mr. Canty's house very well. It was a typical southern farmhouse, with dirty whitewashed walls, a slated roof, and small hermetically sealed windows staring at the morass of manure which constituted the yard. We followed Mr. Canty up the filthy lane that led to it, picked our way round vague and squelching spurs of the manure heap, and were finally led through the kitchen into a stifling best parlour. Mrs. Canty, a vast and slatternly matron, had evidently made preparations for us. There was a newly lighted fire pouring flame up the chimney from layers of bogwood. There was whisky and brandy on the table, and a plateful of biscuits, sugared in white and pink. Upon our hostess was a black silk dress, which indifferently concealed the fact that she was short of bootlaces, and that the boots themselves had made many excursions to the yard and none to the blacking bottle. Her manners, however, were admirable, and whilst I live I shall not forget her potato cakes. They came in hot and hot from a pot oven. They were speckled with caraway seeds. They swam in salt butter, and we ate them shamelessly and greasily, and washed them down with hot whisky and water. I knew to a nicety how ill I should be the next day, and he did not. "Well, gentlemen," remarked Mr. Canty later on, in his best Board of Guardians manner, "I've seen many wrecks between this and the Mizzen Head, but I never witnessed a scene of more disgraceful excess than what was in it to-night." "Hear, hear!" murmured Bosanquet, with unseemly levity. "I should say," went on Mr. Canty, "there was at one time to-night upwards of 100 men dead drunk on the strand, or anyway so drunk that if they'd attempted to speak they'd foam at the mouth." "The creatures!" interjected Mrs. Canty sympathetically. "But if they're drunk to-day," mentioned our host, "it's nothing at all to what they'll be to-morrow and after to-morrow, and it won't be on the strand they'll be drinking it." "Why, where will it be?" said Bosanquet, with his disconcerting English way of asking a point-blank question. Mr. Canty passed his hand over his red cheeks. "There'll be plenty asking that before all's said and done, Captain," he said, with a compassionate smile, "and there'll be plenty that could give the answer if they'd like. But, by damn, I don't think you'll be apt to get much out of the Yochan boys." "The Lord save us, 'twould be better to keep out from the likes of them," put in Mrs. Canty, sliding a fresh avalanche of potato cakes on the dish. "Didn't they pull the clothes off the gauger and pour potheen down his throat till he ran screeching through the streets of Skiborn?" James Canty chuckled. "I remember there was a wreck here one time, and the underwriters put me in charge of the cargo. Brandy it was, cases of the best French brandy. The people had a song about it. What's this? The first verse was: One night on the rocks of Yochan came the bark Isabella so dandy. To pieces she went before dawn, herself and her cargo of brandy, and all met a watery grave, excepting the vessel's carpenter, poor fellow, too far from his home." Mr. Canty chanted these touching lines in a tuneful if wheezy tenor. "Well, gentlemen, we're all friends here," he continued, "and it's no harm to mention that this man below at the public house came asking me would I let him have some of it for a consideration. 'Sullivan,' says I to him, 'if you ran down gold in a cup in place of the brandy, I wouldn't give it to you. Of course,' says I'm not saying but that if a bottle was to get the crack of a stick and to be broken, and a man to drink a glass out of it, that would be no more than an accident. That's no good to me,' says he. 'But if I had 12 gallons of that brandy at Cork,' says he, 'by the Holy German,' says he, saying an awful curse, 'I'd sell 25 out of it.' Well, indeed, it was true for him. It was grand stuff. As the saying is, it would make a horse out of a cow." "It appears to be a handy sort of place for keeping a pub," said Bosanquet. "Shut the door, Margaret," said Mr. Canty, with elaborate caution. "It'd be a queer place that wouldn't be handy for Sullivan." A further tale of great length was in progress when Dr. Hickey's Mephistophelian nose was poked into the best parlour. "Hullo, Hickey! Pumped out, eh?" said Murray. "If I am, there's plenty more like me," replied the doctor enigmatically, "and some of them 3 times over. James, did these gentlemen leave you a drop of anything that you'd offer me?" "Maybe you'd like a glass of rum, Doctor," said Mr. Canty, with a wink at his other guests. Dr. Hickey shuddered. I had next morning precisely the kind of mouth that I had anticipated, and it being my duty to spend the better part of the day administering justice in Skiborn, I received from Mr. Flurry Knox and other of my brother magistrates precisely the class of condolences on my Monday head that I found least amusing. It was unavailing to point out the resemblance between hot potato cakes and molten lead, or to dilate on their equal power of solidifying. The collective wisdom of the bench decided that I was suffering from contraband rum, and rejoiced over me accordingly. During the next 3 weeks, Murray and Bosanquet put in a time only to be equalled by that of the hero.